October 31st, 2003. To many people, this date was just another celebration of the cultural phenomenon known as Halloween. To a much smaller group of people, they would forego trick-or-treating that night to pop in a disc into their 6th generation consoles. They may not have known it at the time, but these individuals would be the first to witness the greatest SpongeBob game ever made. Not only that, but also the perfect license game. I'll spare you the details on what exactly this game is. I mean, it was popular enough to get a remake 17 years later, in which the scene surrounding the game exploded. You'd have to be living underneath Patrick's Rock to not have heard about either version at least once by now. I mean, it's SpongeBob. Leading up to the release of Rehydrated, I saw so many video essays talking about the game, and while I do understand the value for this kind of video was at its peak at that time, it put me in a brief mindset of, well, I'm sure my video will get lost in a sea of others, or I'm sure fans of the game are up to the brim with people's thoughts on it. But you know what? This game has to be one of, if not the most fitting definition of a signature childhood game for myself. So I mean no disrespect when I say forget any and all videos on the game, this is my own. Trashboat Inc.'s love letter to one of my favorite games of all time. This is Battle for Bikini Bottom. The term licensed video games brings a shudder of disgust to all who hear it. This stems from a long history of crappy cash grab attempts dating back to the Atari days. It just so happens that some of the worst games of all time are licensed games. Yeah, we all know and love to dunk on E.T. and Superman 64, which created the stereotype that any and every game that's based on a pre-existing series will sadly be a dumpster fire. Wait, what's that? Scott Pilgrim vs. the World? The Simpsons Hit and Run? DuckTales? Batman game? Take a moment if you can and think of any of the bad experiences you've had with licensed games in the past, and just dismiss that garbage from your mind. I'm here to say that licensed games have the potential to be amazing. See, licensed games are unique in that these games stem from a pre-existing source. It doesn't have to spend time building up a new world to explore and a cast of characters to live in it, but instead can utilize what it already has at its disposal while also building upon that, which leads to time spent catering to the fans of the property with careful character utilization and fun references to the source material. At their best, licensed games are more than just simply playing through whatever genre the devs slap over it. It's taking the embodiment of the property at hand, whether it be a TV show, movie, comics, or whatever, and turning it into video game form. The medium of video games can lend itself so well to expanding and fleshing out the worlds of these properties. The game in question, Battle for Bikini Bottom, does all of this to an almost perfection. It being a 3D platformer gave the devs a chance to really dive in and open up every inch of SpongeBob's established world. Saying every inch is no exaggeration. Almost every notable and even not so notable location from the show is present in some shape or form. I can only think of a small handful of places that are missing. We have series staples like SpongeBob's little home street, I don't know what you would call that, and the Krusty Krab, Jellyfish Fields, Goo Lagoon, and downtown Bikini Bottom. Going deeper into the catalog, there's places that weren't even that pronounced in the show. An area like Rock Bottom, which I first addressed in my SpongeBob PC Games video, shameless plug, where we have the fan favorite episode of SpongeBob visiting the area, but the entirety is held close to the bus stop, never going out into the depths of Rock Bottom. In BFBB, we get to see much past that initial area, and venture out to the Trench of Advanced Darkness, or the Rock Bottom Museum. Yeah, these places are created with platforming in mind, but with adding and piecing together the landscapes of these different locations, we get a better understanding of SpongeBob's world and its entirety. This design is present in every single level across the game. Do you remember that brief moment in the episode Pre-Hibernation Week, where SpongeBob and Sandy are on top of the Sea Needle, a location that's on screen for about 6 seconds and also the only time it's ever referenced by name in the show. Yeah, it's an entire sub-area within downtown Bikini Bottom. Do you remember the industrial park from that same episode? It's an entire boss fight arena against Robo Patrick. It's not even only the main areas that get this kind of loving, for there are plenty of smaller locations to visit within the hub world, like the police station, Shady Shoals, Patrick's Rock, or the Reef Cinema. Bikini Bottom is a living and breathing place to explore that already had a good foundation from the cartoon, but is elevated thanks to the devs fleshing out every single area you would venture across. An added bonus accompanying the world crafted in the game is the music. If you told me the OST was ripped straight from the show, I would 100% believe you. It's so good, man. Jellyfish Fields will be a bop until the end of time. That is factual. There's no debate. Facts. Now that the world is accounted for, what about the characters that inhabit it? Not to worry, all of the main cast and many of the supporting characters are present all throughout the game. In fact, the only smaller characters that I could notably tell are missing were Pearl, Karen, and Squilliam Fancy Son. I have to be honest, the absence of Squilliam hurts the most, but how can anyone be mad with a game that is fully voice acted, with everyone from the show playing their respective voices? The only two exceptions are Mr. Krabs and Mermaid Man, and it's super obvious for both of them. I don't think I will ever get used to Mr. Krabs' replacement voice. It just simply isn't that good.
Your treasure chest's looking a bit light, boy. Do you think I've got bilge water on the brain?
But Mermaid Man's I can get behind. There's something about his new voice that is more senile, which is so funny to me.
Is that the TV repairman?
No, it's that excited sponge kid again.
Oh, are you sure he can't fix the TV?
The game is not afraid to reuse its characters multiple times throughout many of the levels, and no, that's not a bad thing. You know how much of a waste it would have been if Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy were only seen in the Mermalair? Instead, they're all over the place. The different scenarios the characters are presented in with each level makes it feel like you're stepping into another episode of the show. This is amplified by the game showcasing the area when you start a new level, with narration from, well, the narrator, telling you all about the area.
Sand Mountain, where sea creatures go to enjoy an afternoon of falling down.
Even though each level brings new situations from all of these different characters, they always feel true to themselves. Their writing seems as if they were ripped right from the cartoon and dumped into this video game. Some of my favorites include Gary, Larry the Lobster, Mermaid Man, and Plankton. I love how the only thing Gary can say is meow, but everyone he talks to has a normal conversation with him as if he's speaking their same language. Larry isn't especially fun to talk to, but if you try to smack him like you can with any other character, he just kinda tanks it. Really nice touch. As I've already said, Mermaid Man is even more senile and out of it in this game than he normally is, oftentimes saying really random things. He's at his best when Barnacle Boy is accompanying him and trying to make sense of why he's the way he is. You gotta love old people. Finally, Plankton. He's the main antagonist of the story, but the game doesn't try to build him up any more than what he actually is. He's just Plankton, man. You know he's a joke from the show, and he's no different here. I mean, he had a do not obey switch for his robots, which is why he spends most of the game trying to befriend Spongebob and company to the best of his ability in order to get back into the chum bucket. He works so well as a villain because of SpongeBob's total naivety that he actually gets away with not being held responsible for the robot mess for a long while. Seeing SpongeBob slowly start to piece together that it was actually Plankton's fault and not his own is some of the funniest dialogue in the game. Speaking of being funny, hey, this game is really funny. The writing is flat out hilarious. I mean, I'm no comedian, or do I claim to be, but the cartoon has always been about interactions across these wildly different characters, and the game provides us with plenty of that, with even some that you don't really get to see that often from the show, like Plankton and Sandy, which led to one of the funniest bits to me. It's just a couple of words exchanged, but I don't know, this part kills me every single time.
Hello, Plankton.
Oh, the mammal.
The comedy mostly lies in the dialogue, which there is a lot of. This is personal preference, I suppose, but I enjoyed how there's a lot of times where it doesn't show you certain actions the characters are doing. Instead, it makes the player use their imagination to picture what exactly is going on. A perfect example is this scene, which I finally decided has to be the funniest part of the game to me.
SpongeBob, how do I get out of here?
Well, that depends. Do you want the booby-trapped or the non-booby-trapped exit?
Non-booby-trapped, please.
Then go that way. Or maybe it was that way.
Keep in mind, that sequence was put in for no apparent reason, since Squidward only asks SpongeBob that after the previous first conversation is done, so most players may have missed it. These kinds of extra dialogue bits are littered throughout the game, so I found myself re-talking to characters just to see if they had anything more to say. It almost feels like a driving force of the game to keep me going. Like, oh man,
yeah,
there's Mr.
Mr.
Krabs, what
Krabs.
does he gotta say now? There's also something so funny about the game's character models. The environments look really good for the early 6th generation era, and thanks to its cartoony look, it still holds up quite well, in my opinion. The character models, on the other hand, you can call them crusty if you want, and yeah, you'd be right, but some of them are so repulsive that it makes them really fun to look at. I feel like the devs really embraced the ugliness, especially on SpongeBob's animations. Like, what is that? Or that? Or that, or that. A comedic element that's a little more on the subtle side are all the references the game has in store. The amount present is honestly too much to notice on any single playthrough. I'd say I'm a big SpongeBob fan, but many of these just flew past my head. The golden spatulas, which are the main collectibles, that's from the show. The way that Sandy and SpongeBob go down slides, that's from the show. The way that SpongeBob dries up when entering Sandy's tree dome, that's from the show. The entire concept of the level SpongeBob's dream, that's from the, well, yeah, you kinda get it. For die-hard fans of the show, each and every one of these references serve as a nice little tribute to the series that we all love. Here's just a long list of them from spongebob.fandom.com, because otherwise I would be talking about them all day. Hopefully now you realize just the utter potential a licensed game can have if it is cared for and catered by people who love the property itself first and foremost. All of what I've been rambling on about showcases a game that is soaked in SpongeBob love from top to bottom. It totally feels like a group of diehard fans were paid to make a game about the sponge, and it just so happened that these fans were really good at making games, because Battle for Bikini Bottom is an amazing 3D collectathon, and here's why, after this commercial break.
I can see Squidward's house from up here. And he's not wearing any pants. Oh wait, he never wears pants.
Truly, a lost art in video games are cheat codes. Back in the 2000s, cheat codes were all the rage. If you had the money at the book fair, you were a god among men. Battle for Bikini Bottom has its own share of really fun cheats, so let's check them out. Squidward's bad attitude getting you down? Well, just make him really tiny. The joke's on him now. Is Plankton's villainy not cutting it out for you? Well, make him a bit more threatening by making him huge! Big Chungus wishes he could. All of your time beating old people doesn't have to be wasted. Now get shiny objects for showing the elderly who's boss. Here's SpongeBob, but naked.
All that artwork.
Don't ask questions you aren't prepared to handle the answer to.
I have to ask the question, what's the point of having a world, characters, and references that are faithful to the original source if the gameplay is some hot garbage? While the first part of the video went over a crucial part of what makes a licensed game great, an almost equally important part comes into play when you actually play the game. It should always be expected that the core gameplay is important to the overall experience, regardless if it's a licensed game or not. Luckily for us, Battle for Bikini Bottom is pretty good, and by pretty pretty good, I mean freaking amazing. And also surprisingly unique. Off the top of my head, there's no other collectathon that has the same structure. The game is an interesting mix between something akin to the linearity of a 2D platformer and the NPC heavy, slower platforming of something like Banjo-Tooie. You guys mind if I quickly praise the game for not having lives, but rather checkpoint posts all throughout the levels? This caveman design choice was still being used by bigger games at the time like Mario Sunshine. Just disgusting. Anyways, besides downtown Bikini Bottom and Sand Mountain, every level has a linear structure, where it's hard to lose your way as long as you continue forward. Here's the obligated, linear doesn't necessarily mean bad message, because it works in the game's favor. With each level being an actual place from the show, this linear design choice gives the chance to set up segmented key locations, either from the show or something new that fits into the area itself, like the Rock Bottom Museum I mentioned earlier. Upon first entering the level, you're greeted by a character that usually gives you the main spatula quest. A lot of the time, it'll either be a fetch quest for a specific item, or a certain task that takes the entirety of the level to actually complete. Working towards the main spatula is where you'll find the rest of the level's 8 objectives. The golden spatulas can be put into 2 main categories: environment spatulas and NPC missions. The environmental spatulas are placed out in the open at the ends of every sub-area within the levels. I should mention that every level is split into roughly 3 to 4 areas that make up the overall location. For example, in Goo Lagoon you start off on the beach, crossing the ocean and scaling up giant sand mountains. But then you venture into the sea caves and finally end up at the Goo Lagoon Pier, which has this fun carnival feel to it. All 3 of these areas fall under the Goo Lagoon umbrella, but considering how different they feel, it keeps the gameplay fresh and makes you excited to see where exactly you'll get to platform across next. The NPC missions should be somewhat self-explanatory. These are usually given at the beginning of any sub-area, in which they are the main focus. These aren't locked to just one NPC and task per area. Somewhere like the Murmelair has multiple to dish out in one single place. Speaking of the Murmelair, it has one of the worst spatulas in the game. You know what I'm talking about. This spinning tower puzzle thing. Wait, what? The ballroom? Yeah, it's kind of annoying, but it's one of the most layered and interesting spatulas in the game. And only this part is really irksome. The spinning towers, however, can go die. For some reason, I can never remember the correct way you're supposed to flip the towers. I just hate it. The majority of the other spatulas I don't hate though. The devs really let loose and got creative with a lot of these. Like the spatula where you have to annoy Squidward by just jumping around his house a bunch of times, recapturing the Flying Dutchman's ghost ship from the robots, or the infamous Patrick's Dream spatula. Some really riveting gameplay right there. There's always something new to look forward to while playing through the game, except Kelp Forest. I don't like Kelp Forest. I gotta say though, something bothered me a lot when replaying through this game. Why does almost every character have so many spatulas across the game that they won't give to the main characters unless they do something for them? When actually, all of their problems are directly related to the robots, in which if they gave the spatulas sooner, they could solve this whole mess faster. Also, Patrick and Sandy both have their own mini stash of spatulas that they won't give to Spongebob unless he helps them out too, even though they are directly working together. Mini rant over. What ties together the entire package is how well the game feels to play through its tight and responsive controls. Except for the Spongebob. And it's almost sandboxy feeling. I'm not calling the game an open sandbox, not at all, since that would contradict the game's linear style. Instead, the platforming feels so open to the player to discover unique ways to clear objectives and collect items. It's hard to describe because I'm not specifically talking about speedrunning strats per se, which by the way, this game's speedrun is so sick, check it out if you can, please and thank you. But rather, well, let me just show you some examples. You see this button? Well, I'm supposed to platform across there to hit it, but nah, I'll just throw a bubble bowl to activate it. There's this sock in the sea caves of Goo Lagoon where you're expected to backtrack with Patrick to safely walk across the frozen water to snag it, but with careful platforming, you can get it a bit earlier with Spongebob, which by the way looks so much cooler. Having a careful eye lets you skip over this entire section of the Murmelair. Okay, maybe that one's a bit extreme. I'm not sure if a lot of these shortcuts were intentional by the devs or not, but they are there and it makes the game feel personalized to however the player wants to think outside the box. and not in a creepy way. A smaller element that may be taken for granted are the tikis. These little things are scattered across the game and serve as a way to obtain shiny objects, which are pretty much the game's currency. These things continue to impress me more and more every time I play the game. For one, the many unique types of tikis introduced keeps the player from what could have been a mindless button mash on sight turned into something you actually have to think about. Sure, you have the normal wooden tikis, but they quickly become more elaborate, such as the Thunder Tiki, which either explodes on impact or detonates a few seconds after touching it. What about the Shh Tikis, which disappear if ran up to? So SpongeBob has to tippy-toe to them to bash them open. Although what really left me impressed was that the tikis are sometimes used for platforming to get hidden collectibles. For example, this sock on a top of a sandcastle is only obtainable if you can climb up this long pillar of tikis, but watch out because halfway there's a Thunder Tiki, meaning if you don't make the leap for the sandcastle in time, it'll all come tumbling down. Just so many layers. Not even to mention they're often used as obstacles during the sliding segments, or how they can be an added option for combating the robot enemies. Speaking of which, if you've seen my analysis of Jungle HIJINX from DKC, shameless plug number 2, you know how much importance I place on the combat in platformers. In the video, I pointed out that 3D platformers as a whole usually have lackluster combat sequences, and well, I'm really not trying to wank BFBB off too much, but it has the best combat out of any 3D platformer I've played. Before getting into the nitty-gritty, we gotta know who our playable characters are, and how they differ from one another. It should hopefully go without saying that the main character is SpongeBob. He'll be the dude that you use most often, so the majority of the game's mechanics center around the sponge. He has the most amount of moves, with even some being unlockable as the game progresses. This means that he has the most efficient ways to combat any of the types of robots. Patrick is what I've dubbed the Chunky Kong archetype. He's slower and the least mobile out of the three, but his advantage is that he can pick up and throw things. Mostly his fruits, but he can knock the robots into an unconscious state to use them as projectiles. I love his character, but honestly Patrick feels the most boring to play, since a lack of aerial attacks and a relative large amount of lag on most of his throwing moves just equates to a sluggish experience, especially when he's compared to Sandy. Sandy is what I can only describe as overpowered. Her mid-air lasso swing, which acts like a slowly descending third jumps of sorts, lasts just way too long. The detection surrounding her Texas trailer hitches, yeah, that's what they're actually called, are just massive. You can rope onto them when you're directly below them and build up enough height to glide to places that you probably shouldn't be able to go to. Not even to mention she has an aerial kick, a grounded karate chop, and can even lasso faraway enemies or Thunder Tikis to finish the job. Yeah, she's kind of wanked out of her squirrel skull. Plankton's robot army consists of many types of mechanical threats that continually pop up all throughout the game. Even approaching the last set of levels, there's still new robots being introduced. The entire robotic cast just has so much personality. All of their designs are unique, and couple this with the cutscene that is played when the player is first introduced to them. It shows off their main attack and their weaknesses. This is such an amazing unnecessary detail that really drives home the charm that this antagonizing force brings to the table. They start off pretty basic at the beginning, like these bots who just roll up and swing at you. They're pretty much fodder. Oh, wow, that's their actual names.
Bobby.
They do progressively get a bit more tricky to destroy. For example, the Chucks, who float above the ground and throw missiles at you from afar. Near the end, we get robots like the Tubelets, who are a pair of 3 robots that breathe fire. If you destroy one without finishing the other 2, they explode. Even the smaller fodder bots get upgraded more and more as you progress. However, the main satisfaction of the combat comes from how open-ended it seems. There's always multiple ways to deal with any of the robots, utilizing good usage out of all of the playable characters' moves and abilities. Let's take the G-Love robot that spins its many hands around, slapping anyone that stands in its way. Just with Spongebob, you can drop down on it with a bubble bounce, or get hit on purpose to destroy it with your bubble spin while he's in his clapping animation. The Bubble Ball, Cruise Missile, and Thunder Tikis work too. If you get really creative, you can bring 2 of them together and they just crash into each other's hands and explode. Really satisfying stuff, which I mean applies to every robot. Every time you hit them, they get smacked away and just combust. And if you line them up just right, they can get smacked into the other robots that also combust. Another essential question you must ask is, what's the point of having a good combat system if it doesn't serve any real purpose? Aside from that sweet satisfaction of destroying them, the robots are one of two main sources for shiny objects, the other being the aforementioned tikis. Shiny objects are used for two main things: shiny object holes and the Mr. Krabs spatulas. I'ma get to Mr. Krabs in 1 minute. The shiny object holes, which are usually in clamshell form, come up every once in a while across all of the levels. Usually each level has about 2, but there's some that has up to 4. The amount of shiny objects you gotta pay gradually increases over the course of the game. It starts at 125, but then quickly shoots up to the 2000s after you have gotten a chance to earn a good stash for yourself. The shiny objects feel like they're everywhere. I mean, you're constantly bashing robots and tikis. If you don't stop to grind any or die a bunch of times, which resets the robots and tikis, you generally have enough shiny objects to pay the toll. And there's enough time in between them so you can build back up. I'm totally fine with this since it gives a purpose for collecting all of these shiny objects in the first place. The tolls themselves vary between being somewhat mandatory to progress through the entire level and others being more so optional. These normally get you either a spatula or sock, which is good and all, except for the tolls that only activate a bungee that leads you straight to a collectible. These are kinda on the lazy side, but they are a minority. Overall, a good way to encourage tiki breaking and combat with the robots. The Mr. Krabs spatulas. Well, let me preface this with going over Patrick's socks. Patrick's entire sock collection is missing somehow, and he tasks you to find them all across every level. For every 10 socks you bring back, he awards you with a spatula. The socks act as your secondary collectible throughout the game. Some of them are out in plain sight, others are hidden behind objects or areas, and others you have to do something special for it to appear. I would say overall they're hidden fairly well because it seems like I always tend to miss a couple even after playing this game a billion times. Really good game design, right? Well, much like Patrick, Mr. Krabs also has a special task for you to gain 8 extra spatulas. You just simply have to give him a gradually increasing amounts of shiny objects. Part of me doesn't want to be mad at this because it fits so well with Mr. Krabs' character, but I can't ignore bad and lazy game design. If the shiny object holes weren't in the game, then it wouldn't be as bad, but they are, and they eat away all of your shiny objects you gain throughout the game. You could ignore the more optional tolls, but I think most people would rather use their objects for interactive gameplay and not a pay to get golden spatulas with no effort. In my recording playthrough of the game, I had enough shiny objects at the end to buy a grand total of 0 of Mr. Krabs spatulas. Now, it kinda varies because not too long ago I did a playthrough and I think I had enough to buy 2 or 3 spatulas, but regardless, you have a very high probability of not being able to buy even half of them. That really sucks. Hey man, you can just ignore them, right? You only need 75 out of the 100 spatulas to beat the game. Oh yeah, thanks, I never thought of that. Except that's not really a fair train of thought to just dismiss them completely. So onward to grinding shiny objects we go. Pause the gameplay, bro. Forget this, bring on the cheat codes. There is one that gives you an instant 1000 shiny objects. Yeah, I don't want to cheat either, so we can do whatever this is instead. Do I have enough shiny objects now, Mr. Krabs? In all seriousness though, I don't blame anyone for wanting to cheat to get these spatulas, especially if you put them off until the very end, which I do recommend doing. You still need these to 100% the game, which honestly the bonus for it isn't the best. I mean, it wouldn't go in my theoretical top 5 favorites or top 5 worst 100% completion bonus list. I should really make that list one day. Look, I don't want to end the video off on a bad note, so can I just gush about the credits? Yeah, you heard me right, the credits. To end the game off with the cherry on top, the devs added in this fun little obstacle course while the credits play. I mean, it's pretty mindless just to roll around, but think about it. Almost every game ever, licensed or not, just has the credits rolling with a boring background. Not that this is necessary, but my point is that the devs could have easily rolled the credits on a static image, and nobody would have thought differently, especially since this is a licensed game. But by now, you should know that this isn't any normal licensed game. This is a game that was a cornerstone for many childhoods. This is a game that stood the test of time and continues to age like fine wine. This is a game that is SpongeBob SquarePants from inside and out. This game is one of my favorite games of all time. This game is Battle for Bikini Bottom, or as I like to call it, the perfect license game.